Chapter 7. A Studio Accident. Worried, Nancy stood tensely, waiting for the housekeeper to continue. "It's about your father," Hannah Gruen began. "Oh, has he been hurt?" Nancy cried out fearfully. Sympathetically, the woman put an arm around the girl's shoulders. "Yes, dear. But Mr. Drew is very, very fortunate," Hannah went on, "not to have been injured more severely. He was attacked in his office by an unknown assailant." "How dreadful!" Nancy cried out. "Tell me what happened," she urged, as Hannah paused for a moment. "Your father was seated at his desk. He heard the door open and thought it was his secretary. Instead, a masked man with a hat pulled low over his forehead rushed in and attacked your father. He fought back, but suddenly his assailant gave him a hard blow, which knocked him out. He was unconscious when his secretary found him." "How horrible!" Nancy exclaimed. "Where is Dad now?" Hannah said that he was in the hospital. The doctor who had been called in had insisted he be taken there and remain quiet for a while. "I must go to Dad at once," Nancy said. "Which hospital, Hannah?" "River Heights General." Nancy hurried to the hospital. Upon inquiry, she learned that her father was in room 782. Her heart pounding, Nancy went up in the elevator and walked swiftly down the hall. The door to room 782 was open. Mr. Drew was in bed, propped up with pillows. "Oh, Dad," Nancy murmured, kissing him lightly. "Now, don't worry, honey." Her father smiled wanly. "I'm really all right. The doctor just wants to make a checkup." "Well, I'm glad you're all right," said Nancy. But her eyes traveled to the several bruises on her father's cheeks and forehead, and she thought his eyes seemed to glisten more than usual. He probably was feverish, she decided. "I'm glad you came, honey," the lawyer said. "Of course, this little scrap I got into means I'll have to postpone my trip to Honolulu." "Never mind," Nancy consoled him. "I won't leave yet either. The mystery of Kaluakua can wait." "I'm afraid it can't," Mr. Drew replied. "My attacker said something which I believe makes it imperative for you and the others to go ahead without me and start solving the mystery." The lawyer explained that just before he had lost consciousness from the knockout blow, his assailant had remarked acidly, "Maybe this will keep you on the mainland." Nancy's jaw set. "It seems to prove that your assailant is one of the double Scorps," she declared grimly. Her father nodded. "I'm sorry that I didn't get a look at his face. In fact, it was when I tried to that he gave me the final blow. All I can tell you is that he wore a gray tweed suit. Nancy, I wish you would go to my office and see if you can pick up any clues. The police were notified, and they are probably there." Mr. Drew smiled fondly at his daughter. "Maybe you can give them a little help." Nancy agreed to go at once and returned to the hospital later. She hurried to the lawyer's office and found his secretary, Miss Robertson, on the verge of hysterics. "Oh, Nancy, how is he?" the young woman cried out. "Dad's really feeling quite well," Nancy replied. "Please tell me your story." Miss Robertson said that she had been late getting in that morning. When she arrived, the door to Mr. Drew's private office was ajar. "I sorted the mail and started to carry it into your father's desk," she said. "And there he was, lying on the floor." "So you didn't see his attacker?" Nancy asked. "No, he'd gone before I got here." Nancy walked into her father's office. She was greeted by 2 police detectives whom she knew. One was busy taking fingerprints, but said he felt sure Mr. Drew's assailant had not touched any of the furniture. The other man was examining the carpet with a magnifying glass, trying to distinguish the stranger's footprints from those of other persons. "I'm afraid this isn't going to be of much help," he said finally, standing up. Nancy, meanwhile, had been walking round the edge of the room, her eyes alert for any clue that the stranger unwittingly might have left. Finally, she asked, Is it all right for me to walk in the center of the room now?" When the detective nodded, she began a search of chairs, table, bookcase, windowsills, and desk. Between two papers on her father's desk, she found a small piece of tweed cloth. "I may have a clue," she told the men excitedly. Nancy called Miss Robertson into the room and asked her if any papers had been scattered on the floor when she found Mr. Drew there. "Oh, yes," the secretary replied. "They were all over the place. I picked them up and put them on your father's desk." Nancy turned to the detectives. "I believe this piece of tweed may have been torn from the coat of the man who attacked my father," she said. One of them put the scrap of cloth in an envelope and dropped it into his pocket. "I guess your father pulled it from the fellow's coat. It may be a big help to us." Nancy left the office and returned to the hospital. After reporting the latest finding to her father, she asked him when he would be able to make the Hawaiian trip. "Oh, I'll follow you in a few days," he said cheerily. "But you'll be home alone," Nancy protested. Mr. Drew, realizing how worried his daughter was that he might be attacked again, promised her he would not stay alone. "I'll move down to the club for a few nights," he said. Nancy made 2 more trips to the hospital that day, but there was no further news about Mr. Drew's attacker. Early the next morning, Mr. Marvin drove Bess, George, and their suitcases in the family station wagon to the Drew home. Nancy and Hannah climbed in, and the travelers set off for the airport. It was a perfect day for flying, and within an hour, Nancy and her friends were winging their way across the United States towards California. "We're actually above the clouds," remarked Bess, who was seated next to the window. "I can't see any land below us." "At this altitude, you wouldn't see much anyway," spoke up George, seated beside her cousin. "We're flying pretty high." Nancy's seatmate was a beautiful young woman who had slept most of the time. She awoke as luncheon was served on trays fastened to the armrests. After lunch, she chatted with the girls. Learning that they were on their way to Honolulu, she asked, "Are you stopping over at Los Angeles?" "Yes, we are," replied Nancy. "For several hours, in fact. We're taking the night plane across the Pacific." "If you have no plans," said the young woman, who had introduced herself as Sue Rossiter, "I have a suggestion of something interesting you might do. Watch a movie being filmed. First, I should tell you that I'm an actress. The Bramley studio, where I work, is about to start filming a picture. It's a fantasy. I play the lead, a mermaid off Waikiki Beach." "What an interesting part," remarked Nancy, smiling. Sue Rossiter went on to say that the interior scenes for the picture would be made in the studio. "But the outdoor scenes," she added, "are actually going to be shot at Waikiki." To Nancy's disappointment, she learned that the movie company would not make the Hawaiian trip for some time. By then, the visitors from River Heights probably would have left the islands. But the actress said, "Why don't you come to the studio? I'll see that you have passes." "We'd love to," said Nancy. She glanced intently at her seatmate for a moment, then added, "Isn't your stage name Fran Johnson?" The young woman laughed and nodded. "I'll be expecting you at the studio." When the plane reached Los Angeles, the actress was met by a young man and driven off at once. After Hannah Gruen and the 3 girls had checked their baggage on the Honolulu plane, Nancy wired Ned to inform him which flight they were taking. Then the 4 took a taxi to the Bramley studio. They had not gone far on the boulevard when Bess, looking out the rear window, insisted that they were being followed. "How can you tell in this heavy traffic?" George chided her cousin from the front seat. Nancy had already glanced back too. "Bess could be right," she said, and leaned forward to tell the driver their suspicions. "Would it be possible for you to throw the car behind us off our trail?" she asked. "Why, sure, miss," the driver replied. With a broad grin, he added, "We've got to protect our visitors." The taxi man had no trouble eluding the car. He took a circuitous route, but finally pulled up in front of the Bramley studio. Fran Johnson was waiting for them at the door. "Hurry," she urged. "The author of the script is going to explain a legend in it to a group of company executives. I think you'll find it interesting." She led the way into a small auditorium, motioned the girls to seats, and then left them. A young man, standing before a seated group, was saying, "How much is fact and how much is legend we do not know, but it's said that the first inhabitants of the Hawaiian Islands were Polynesians who came from other Pacific islands, particularly Tahiti. They landed from enormous outrigger canoes. Their favorite landing spot was Waikiki Beach. They preferred to come in on the surf in their shallow canoes rather than land in calmer waters. That is why we have chosen this beach for our story. It takes place about 1,000 years ago. And now, ladies and gentlemen, suppose we proceed directly with the rehearsal." Nancy and her friends followed the others through the building to a large sound stage. Warning signs for absolute silence were posted in several places. Great ceiling lights, manipulated by men on high platforms, flooded the scene. Cameramen seated on small trucks carrying their equipment dollied back and forth for proper shots. Nancy, Bess, George, and Hannah took seats in a row behind the chairs where the director, the author, and 2 executives had sat down. The first scene to be shot was laid just outside an ancient thatch-roofed hut. A young Polynesian actor stepped from the doorway and listened intently. "That strange sound on the water again," he said softly. At that moment, the great light focused directly on him went out and someone called, "Cut!" While waiting for the light to be repaired, the young actor walked over towards the director. Fran Johnson approached Nancy and was just about to speak to her when their attention was diverted to a great boom carrying a workman. Apparently, he was an electrician. The boom swung towards the light which had gone out. As everyone looked upwards, the heavy steel arm suddenly hit another huge light. There was a resounding crash, and a shower of glass came down towards those below. End of chapter 7.